I will continue to read the book The Dream of Enlightenment by Anthony Gottlieb. The first person is Descartes, and this is the second section. René Descartes was born into the upper bourgeois on March 31st, 1596, in a village then called La Haye, in the Loire Valley. Always a secretive man, his motto was Bene Visit, Bene qui latude. He lives well who is well hidden. That's the meaning of that Latin. He would not allow his date of birth to be published in his lifetime, for fear that someone might cast his horoscope. His father had hoped that he would follow him into legal practice and provincial officialdom and marry well. In the event, René disappointed his father's dynastic ambition. Though his older brother, Pierre, delivered the goods, and the family acquired the lowest degree of nobility in 1668. René inherited some farms from his mother's family and then sold them to help pay for his life as a gentleman scholar. His father said that he was the only son to have disappointed him, because he was ridiculous enough to have himself bound in calfskin. Calfskin, I think, means books, I guess. Descartes' mother died when he was 14 months old, and his father entrusted his upbringing to relatives. At the age of 10, René was sent to the recently established Jesuit College of La Flèche. In 1614, he left the Jesuits to study law at Poitiers, graduating and rejoining his family 2 years later. How he then occupied himself is a mystery, but in 1618 he began his travels, aiming, as he later said, to roam about in the world, trying to be a spectator rather than an actor in all the comedies that are played out there. He decided to enroll as a gentleman soldier in the army of Prince Maurice of Nassau, outside Breda. On the choose lines between the north and the south of the Netherlands, Descartes was rather bored, contenting himself with some painting, military architecture, and learning Flemish. It was thanks to an apparently chance meeting in the street in Breda that his intellectual career began to take shape. On 10th November 1618, Descartes was trying to read a mathematical puzzle posted in Flemish on a billboard and asked a passersby, Isaac Beckman, to translate it into Latin. 7 years older than Descartes, Beckman had just completed his medical degree while earning his living as an engineer and a candle maker. He was interested in applying mathematics to mechanics, explaining regularities in physical phenomena in terms of the behavior of their minute constituents, an approach to science that began to flourish in the Netherlands in the late 16th century. The two men struck up a close friendship, and Descartes became in effect Beckman's apprentice. Using his mathematical skills, which were apparently superior to Beckman's, to solve problems set by his master. It is unclear whether or not Beckman was one of the catalysts for the revelation that Descartes claimed to have had at the age of 23, a year to the day after his first meeting with him. That was when he went to bed after a day's excited contemplation in which he discovered the foundations of a marvelous science, and had a series of vivid dreams which he had changed his life. Possibly, this was the nervous breakdown rather than the intellectual breakthrough that Descartes later made it out to be. Either way, within a few years he seems to have been set on a life of learning, focusing on the natural sciences and mathematics. Descartes realized the danger he faced as an innovator. He was rightly worried that some of his scientific work might prove unacceptable to the church and to the educational establishment, especially after hearing of Galileo's recent treatment at the hands of the Inquisition. Galileo had been censored for, among other things, repeating the cardinal error of Copernicus, namely his heliocentrism. The church still maintained that the sun moved around the earth, not vice versa. After all, the Psalms say that the earth cannot be moved. Genesis says that the earth was created before the sun. And Joshua told the sun and the moon to stand still while the children of Israel attacked the Amorites, which it was argued he would not have done it if the sun had already been still. Descartes knew that the earth did move. He wrote to his old friend, Marine Moissannet, that if this view is false, then so too are the entire foundation of my philosophy. In 1633, when the news about Galileo's condemnation reached him, Descartes cancelled the planned publication of his first major scientific treatise, The World. Although little harm could have come to him in the Protestant part of the Netherlands, where he then lived, or probably in France, where there was no Inquisition and considerable sympathy for Galileo, Descartes was keen to avoid rows with the church. At this point, his scientific researches pretty much came to an end. One lesson of Galileo's trial was that religion and science could not ignore one another. If Descartes' work was to be accepted as that of a new Aristotle, which he desperately wanted it to be, then he would have found a way to pacify the pious. There's nothing Descartes would have liked better than to have had his scientific works used as texts in schools, such as the Jesuit College at La Flèche. This is one main reason why he then decided to present these works in the context of a wider philosophical project. If he could demonstrate not only that his science was based on irrefutable principles, but also that he could use it to establish the truth of a religion in a new and better way, then he need have little to fear. This is what he sought to do in 1637, when he published 4 short books in one, 3 scientific essays, prefaced by Discourse on Method. The essays would show that his approach to science could achieve. Compare the deductions I have made about vision, thought, winds, clouds, snow, thunder, and rainbow with what the others have derived. He wrote proudly to a friend. The prefatory discourse would show, among other things, how religion and science could proceed best if they walked hand in hand. The scientific essays which he chose to publish in this collection steered clear of the most controversial topics. They consisted of his innovative geometry, a treatise on meteorology, and one on optics that was largely concerned to establish which shape of a lens would most improve the performance of the recently invented telescope. The discourse also contained a selective summary of his general physics, carefully omitting anything liable to cause offense or misunderstanding, such as the Copernican theory of the solar system and the idea that people's bodies are machines. But the main business of the discourse is conducted in the form of an intellectual autobiography, which starts with an attempt to doubt as much as possible and goes on to report Descartes' discovery of the following alleged truths. Since I, that is Descartes, can doubt that my body exists, but cannot doubt that I myself exist, it follows that I'm not the same thing as my body. What I am is a thinking soul, not a piece of matter, and I know about this soul and its thoughts better than I know about any physical thing, because I'm aware of that my knowledge of some things is inferior to my knowledge of others. I'm aware that I fall short of perfection. Now, this idea of a perfection with which I contrast my own imperfect state is a remarkable one, says Descartes. How did I get it? I could not have come up with it on my own, and in fact, it can only have been planted in me by a being who is himself perfect, that is, by God. Therefore, God exists. Oh, so Descartes says. He also produces a second and gradually unconvincing argument for the existence of a God. One fact that I know about God, Descartes continued, is that he is not a deceiver. Since deceitfulness is an imperfection and God is perfect, it follows that he will not deceive me, nor allow me to be deceived by anyone else when I am doing my best to get at the truth. So I may rest assured that I will not go far wrong in my attempts to understand the world, provided I'm careful in these efforts. Armed with this guarantee of God's goodwill, I can now justifiably dismiss the radical doubts that I encountered at the beginning of my search for truth. That is, I can discount the possibility that I do not know anything at all about the physical world because I might be dreaming or deceived by a powerful demon. The discourse thus demonstrates Descartes' credentials. It shows that he has tried to be supremely cautious and responsible, doubting everything which it is possible for him to doubt before going so far as to claim any knowledge. It shows that for all his apparent materialistic interest in the mechanical philosophy, he considers his soul as separate from his body and therefore as something which may be expected to survive his body's death. It shows that God exists. Indeed, it shows that this twice. And above all, it proves that in order to know about nature, you must first know about God. It was a theology which assured him that scientific knowledge was obtainable. For if Descartes had not found a reason to think that there is a benign God, he would not have been able to rule out the possibility that he is massively deluded about the world. And if he cannot rule this out, then there is little that he or anybody else can rule in. Thus, even somebody whose main ambitions lie in the field of science must admit that theology is the senior discipline. There is no reason to question the sincerity of this. True, the discourse was written partly as an exercise in propaganda to recommend Descartes and his work to the church. But it seems to have been propaganda that Descartes himself on the whole believed. One might well wonder, though, how much the philosophical thing, how much this philosophizing has really revealed about the basis of his controversial scientific ideas. In the discourse, Descartes often referred to a method that had enabled him to obtain new and useful knowledge in the science. Unfortunately, it is not clear what method he is talking about. In one place, he lists 4 cardinal rules that he says he has followed in his inquiring. But as the German philosopher Leibniz, 1646 to 1616, later pointed out, these rules are so vague as to be almost vacuous. The first is never to accept anything as true if I did not have evident knowledge of its truth, and to include nothing more in my judgments than that presented himself to my mind so clearly and so distinctly that I had no occasion to doubt it. The second is to divide each of the difficulties I examined into as many parts as possible. The third is to direct my thoughts in an orderly manner by beginning with the simplest and the most easily known objects in order to ascend little by little to knowledge of the most complex. And the fourth is to make enumeration so complete and review so comprehensive that I could be sure of leaving nothing out. Leibniz was surely right to be unimpressed by these maxioms. If we were to adapt them and to the task of cooking a perfect meal, for example, we might end up with something like the following advice. Consult only when you are absolutely certain it's the best recipe. Do not try to perform too many steps at once. Make sure you do them in the high order. Do not forget any of the ingredients. If there was anything more specific to Descartes' mind, he had a difficulty in saying exactly what it was. The 4 rules were accepted from a book he never managed to finish, and which, even in its uncompleted state, contained no fewer than 21 rules for the direction of the mind. A few of these rules shed some light on the techniques he used in mathematics, but now captures what was distinctive about his work as a whole. They do not seem to reveal much of a link between his style of science and his general philosophy. Elsewhere in the discourse, however, there are some clues to the connection between Descartes' belief in the mechanical philosophy and his musing on God, the soul, and the limits of a country. There's, he says, a fundamental error that infects people's thinking. They never raise their minds about things which can be perceived by the senses. There is the mark of Descartes' real method, if it can be called a method. What guided all of his reasoning, included his thoughts about physics, was his determination to escape what he saw as the limitations of the senses. How exactly it did so emerges more clearly in his masterpiece, which was published in 1641.